Dr. Jin-Ho Park pressed his face against the small window of the transport shuttle as it approached orbital station Alpha 7. The massive structure looked like a giant metal flower floating in the darkness of space, its silver petals gleaming under the light of distant stars. His hands were sweating inside his gloves, not from the temperature but from pure excitement and nervousness. This was it. The moment humanity had been waiting for since they first discovered they weren't alone in the universe. First official contact with an alien species that actually wanted to talk to them peacefully. "Docking in 5 minutes, Doctor," the pilot called from the front. Jin-Ho nodded and checked his equipment one more time. His small travel bag contained everything he needed for the historic meeting, including Bomi's portable habitat. The little python was his constant companion during research trips, and regulations allowed one small pet for emotional support during long missions. The docking process felt like it took forever, but finally, Jin-Ho found himself walking through the airlock, into the station. The artificial gravity felt normal under his feet, and the air smelled clean with just a hint of ozone from the recycling systems. His escort, a nervous human technician named Kyung-min, led him through corridors lined with monitoring equipment and communication arrays. "The Vytherians arrived 3 hours ago," Kyung-min explained as they walked. "They've been very polite so far. Their leader speaks perfect English, which is honestly a bit creepy if you ask me." Jin-Ho tried to calm his racing heart. He had studied every piece of available information about the Vytherians over the past 6 months. They were reptilian humanoids, from a planet called Vither Prime, roughly the same size as humans but with scales instead of skin. Their society seemed peaceful, focused on science and diplomacy rather than conquest. They reached the main meeting room, and Kyung-min paused at the door. "Ready, Doctor?" Jin-Ho took a deep breath. As ready as anyone can be for making history. The door slid open with a soft hiss, and Jin-Ho stepped inside. The room was circular, with a large table in the center, surrounded by chairs designed to accommodate different body types. Soft lighting made everything feel welcoming rather than clinical. And there she was. Nara stood near the far wall, examining a display showing Earth's solar system. She was exactly as the briefings had described, but somehow more real, more alive than any photograph could capture. Her scales were a beautiful deep green that shifted to blue in the light, and when she turned to face him, her large golden eyes showed genuine warmth. "Dr. Park," she said, her voice melodic despite the slight hiss that accompanied certain sounds. "I am Nara of the Vytherian Science Council. It is truly an honor to meet you." She extended her hand in a very human gesture, and Jin-Ho shook it, carefully. Her grip was firm but gentle, and her scales felt surprisingly warm and smooth. "The honor is mine," Jin-Ho replied, surprised at how normal this felt. "Thank you for coming so far to meet with us." Nara smiled, an expression that looked slightly different on her reptilian features, but was unmistakably friendly. "Your species fascinates us, Doctor. We have much to learn from each other." They sat down at the table, and for the first hour everything went perfectly. They discussed their respective planets, shared scientific discoveries, and even laughed at each other's jokes. Jin-Ho began to relax, thinking this might be easier than anyone had expected. That's when the station's ancient security system, designed decades ago to protect against unknown threats, suddenly decided that an alien presence meant danger. Red. Warning lights began flashing throughout the room. The red warning lights bathed everything in an eerie glow. As alarms blared throughout the station, Jin-Ho jumped to his feet, his heart hammering against his ribs. "What's happening?" Nara's golden eyes went wide with panic. "No, no, no," she whispered, her voice trembling. "This cannot be happening now." Before Jin-Ho could ask what she meant, a section of the wall behind Nara began to slide open with a deep, mechanical rumble. The sound sent chills down his spine, because it wasn't supposed to be there. No door was marked on any of the station blueprints he had studied. "Nara, what is that?" Jin-Ho backed away from the opening wall, but the room suddenly felt much smaller than it had moments before. "Emergency." "Protocols," she said, her voice barely audible over the alarms. "My people, we brought protection. I thought we had disabled it. I thought we had more time." From the dark opening came a sound that made Jin-Ho's blood freeze. It was like wind moving through a cave, but rhythmic, purposeful. Breathing. Something massive was breathing in there. Then it emerged. Jin-Ho had seen large snakes before in zoos and nature documentaries, but nothing had prepared him for this. The creature that slithered out of the hidden chamber was easily 20 feet long and as thick as a tree trunk. Its scales were midnight black with silver patterns that seemed to shift and move in the flashing red lights. But the most terrifying thing was its eyes, intelligent, calculating, and completely focused on him. "Guardian protocol activated," a mechanical voice announced from speakers Jin-Ho hadn't noticed before. "Threat detected. Initiating protection sequence." "I am not a threat," Jin-Ho shouted, but his voice sounded small and pathetic against the blaring alarms. The bioserpent moved with impossible speed for something so large. One moment it was across the room, the next it was right in front of Jin-Ho, rearing up to its full height. Its head was level with his chest, and he could see his own terrified reflection in its dark eyes. "Please," Nara called out desperately. "Override Command Alpha 7-9. Stand down immediately." The creature's head turned slightly toward her voice, but then swiveled back to Jin-Ho. Whatever programming controlled it had decided he was dangerous, and nothing Nara said was going to change its mind. Jin-Ho tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The creature struck faster than he could blink, not with fangs, but with its powerful body. Thick coils wrapped around his waist, then his chest, lifting him off the ground with terrifying ease. The pressure was immediate and overwhelming. Jin-Ho gasped for air as the coils tightened, squeezing the breath from his lungs. His ribs creaked under the strain, and bright spots danced across his vision. "Stop it!" Nara screamed, rushing toward them. "You're killing him!" She reached the bioserpent and placed her hands on its scales, speaking rapidly in her own language. The sounds were like nothing Jin-Ho had ever heard, clicks and hisses that seemed to have meaning beyond words. But the creature ignored her completely, focused entirely on crushing the life out of what it perceived as a threat to its charge. Jin-Ho tried to speak, to explain that he meant no harm, but he couldn't draw enough breath to form words. The room began to spin around him, and he realized with growing horror that he might die here, in this moment that was supposed to represent hope for both their species. The irony wasn't lost on him, even as consciousness started to slip away. Humanities. First peaceful contact with aliens, and he was going to be killed by their security system. Nara's voice grew more frantic, but it sounded farther and farther away as darkness crept in around the edges of Jin-Ho's vision. Jin-Ho's world was fading to black. The bioserpent's coils squeezed tighter around his chest, and each breath became a struggle. His vision blurred as he watched Nara frantically trying to reach the creature's head, her scaled hands pressing against its midnight black body while she spoke in desperate, clicking sounds. But the Guardian wasn't listening. Its programming was simple and absolute. Eliminate the threat. Jin-Ho could feel his heartbeat thundering in his ears, growing weaker with each passing second. Through his dimming vision, he saw Nara step back, her golden eyes wild with panic. She was looking around the room frantically, searching for something, anything that might help. Her gaze swept over the overturned chairs, the flashing control panels, and then stopped. Bommy's travel container sat in the corner where Jin-Ho had placed it when they first entered the room. The small, clear case was designed for transporting research animals safely, with air holes and a secure locking mechanism. Inside, completely oblivious to the chaos around her, Bommy the python was coiled peacefully on her heating pad. Nara stared at the container for a long moment, and Jin-Ho saw something change in her expression. Fear mixed with determination, but also something else. Revulsion, maybe even terror. "Forgive me," she whispered, though Jin-Ho wasn't sure if she was talking to him, to her guardian, or to someone else entirely. She rushed to the container and grabbed it with both hands. Her scaled fingers fumbled with the latch, shaking so badly that it took her 3 tries to get it open. When the lid finally came free, she threw it aside and reached inside. The moment her skin touched Bommy, Nara recoiled as if she'd been burned. She pulled her hand back, staring at her palm like it had been contaminated with something toxic. Her whole body was trembling now, and Jinho could hear her making soft, clicking sounds of distress. But then she looked at him again, saw how his face was turning blue from lack of oxygen, and something hardened in her expression. She reached into the container again, this time wrapping both hands around Bomi's small body. The python, startled awake by the sudden handling, coiled around Nara's wrist in the gentle way that well-socialized snakes do when they're seeking warmth and security. But Nara's reaction was anything but calm. Her entire body went rigid, her golden eyes rolled back, and she made a sound that was part gasp, part scream. It was like watching someone grab a live electrical wire. Every muscle in her body tensed, her scales seemed to ripple and change color, and for a moment Jinho thought she might collapse. But she stayed on her feet, holding Bomi despite whatever agony she was experiencing. "I don't know if this will work," she said through gritted teeth, her voice strained and strange. "But my people have old stories, old ways." She turned toward the bio-serpent, Bomi still wrapped around her arm. The little python's dark eyes were calm and curious, completely unaware that she might be the key to saving Jinho's life. Nara approached the massive guardian slowly, and for the first time since it had emerged, the creature's attention shifted away from Jinho. Its huge head turned toward Nara and the small earth serpent she carried, and something changed in its dark eyes. The crushing pressure around Jinho's chest loosened just slightly, not enough to free him, but enough to let him draw a desperate breath. The bio-serpent's tongue flicked out, tasting the air, and its entire posture changed. It was still holding Jinho, but now it seemed confused, uncertain. Nara took another step closer, her whole body still shaking from whatever touching Bomi was doing to her. "Please understand," she whispered to the guardian. "Please listen." Nara stood trembling before the massive bio-serpent, little Bomi wrapped around her scaled arm like a living bracelet. Jinho could barely breathe in the creature's crushing grip, but he watched in fascination as something extraordinary began to happen. Nara closed her golden eyes and placed her free hand gently on Bomi's small head. The moment she did, her entire body went still, as if she was listening to something only she could hear. Her breathing became slow and rhythmic, matching some pattern that Jinho couldn't understand. Then she began to move. It started with her fingers. She pressed them against Bomi's body in a series of gentle squeezes, not hard enough to hurt the little python, but firm enough to get her attention. The pattern was complex, like Morse code, but using touch instead of sound. Press, press, pause, long squeeze, 3 quick taps. Bomi responded by tightening slightly around Nara's wrist, then loosening, then tightening again in a different rhythm. It looked almost like the snake was answering back. "What are you doing?" Jinho gasped out, using what little breath he had left. "Something my grandmother taught me," Nara whispered without opening her eyes. "Something we were told to forget." The bio-serpent watched this exchange with growing interest. Its massive head swayed closer to Nara and Bomi, and Jinho felt the crushing pressure around his chest ease just a little more. He could actually breathe now, though each breath still hurt. Nara continued her strange conversation with Bomi, her fingers dancing across the python's scales in increasingly complex patterns. Sometimes she would pause and let Bomi respond with her own movements, coiling tighter, shifting position, even touching Nara's skin with the tip of her tail. "Long ago," Nara said softly, her eyes still closed, "my people lived alongside the great serpents of our world. We didn't just train them or control them, we spoke with them. Through touch, through pressure, through the ancient language that all serpents understand." As she spoke, something incredible happened. The bio-serpent began to mirror Bomi's movements. When the little python tightened around Nara's arm, the guardian's coils around Jinho would shift in the same way. When Bomi moved her head to the left, the massive creature would turn its head in the same direction. "It's working," Jinho breathed, afraid to speak too loudly and break whatever spell was happening. Nara nodded, sweat beading on her scaled forehead from the concentration. "Bomi is translating for us. She carries the old language in her body, in her movements. The guardian recognizes it." She began a new sequence of touches, longer, more deliberate patterns that made Bomi coil and uncoil in what looked like a dance. The bioserpent watched every movement with laser focus, its grip on Jinho continuing to loosen. "I'm telling it that you are not a threat," Nara explained, her voice growing stronger. "I'm explaining that you are a friend, an ally. But the language is old and I'm not sure I remember all the words." Jinho could feel blood flowing back to his arms and legs as the pressure decreased. The bioserpent's coils were still around him, but now they felt more like restraints than crushing bonds. Bommy suddenly lifted her head and looked directly at the Guardian, her small black eyes meeting the creature's massive ones. For a moment, the two serpents, one tiny and harmless, one enormous and deadly, seemed to have a conversation that no human or Vithirian could understand. Then Bommy did something that made Jinho's heart skip. She unwound herself from Nara's arm and began. Toes slithered toward the bioserpent's head. "No, Bommy," Jinho called out weakly. "Don't." But the little python had already reached the Guardian's massive snout and was gently touching it with her nose, the way snakes greet each other in the wild. The bioserpent's eyes widened, and suddenly, all at once, its coils released. Jinho completely. Jinho collapsed to the floor the moment the bioserpent's coils released him. His legs felt like jelly, and his chest ached with every breath, but he was alive. He rolled onto his back, gasping and staring up at the ceiling while his body remembered how to function without being crushed. The massive Guardian had retreated several feet away, and now sat coiled in a perfect spiral, watching Bommy with what could only be described as respectful attention. The little python had made herself comfortable on top of the creature's huge head, looking ridiculously small but completely at ease. "Jinho, are you hurt?" Nara rushed to his side, dropping to her knees beside him. But the moment she tried to help him sit up, something strange happened. Her golden eyes suddenly went wide, and she jerked her hands back as if his skin had burned her. She stared at her palms in shock, then looked at Jinho, then back at her. "Hands, what's wrong?" Jinho asked, propping himself up on his elbows. He felt bruised and shaky, but nothing seemed broken. "I can—" Nara's voice trailed off. She reached toward him again, more slowly this time, and when her scaled fingers touched his arm, they both gasped. Jinho felt it too. A strange tingling sensation that started where she touched him and spread up his arm like warm electricity. It wasn't painful, but it was definitely not normal. "This shouldn't be possible," Nara whispered, pulling her hand back again. But even without physical contact, Jinho could still feel something, a presence in the back of his mind that hadn't been there before. Across the room, Bommy lifted her head from where she was resting on the bioserpent and looked directly at them. Her small black eyes seemed more alert than usual, more aware. "What did you do to me?" Jinho asked, though he didn't feel afraid. Whatever was happening, it didn't feel dangerous. "I touched your serpent," Nara said, and her voice was filled with a mixture of wonder and horror. "In my culture, that is, it creates bonds that should never exist, connections between minds that were meant to stay separate." She stood up quickly and began pacing around the room, her tail swishing anxiously behind her. "My people have laws about this, ancient laws. We are forbidden from touching the serpents of other worlds because of what it does to us." Jinho managed to sit up fully, though his ribs protested the movement. "What kind of bonds?" Instead of answering with words, Nara stopped pacing and looked directly at him. Suddenly, Jinho's mind was flooded with images and feelings that weren't his own. He saw Vither Prime through Nara's memories, a world of crystal cities and vast serpent gardens where her people lived in harmony with creatures that could grow as large as buildings. He felt her childhood fear of ever leaving her planet, her excitement at being chosen for this diplomatic mission, and her absolute terror when the Guardian had attacked him. The connection lasted only a few seconds before Nara broke eye contact. But it left Jinho breathless. "That's what I mean," she said quietly. "Through Bommy, we are now linked. I can share my thoughts with you, my memories, my emotions, and you can do the same with me." "Is that bad?" Jinho asked, though part of him already knew the answer from the worry in her voice. Nara sat down heavily in one of the chairs, looking suddenly exhausted. "My people will consider it a violation of natural law. They believe that different species should remain separate, that mixing our consciousness creates abominations." Bommy chose that moment, to slither down from the bio-serpent and make her way across the floor to Jinho. When she reached him, she coiled around his wrist in her usual friendly manner, but Jinho could swear he felt something different in her movements, more purpose, more intelligence. "What about humans?" Nara asked. Suddenly, "What will your people think of this?" Jinho looked at Bommy, then at the massive guardian that was now resting peacefully in the corner, then at Nara with her worried golden eyes. "Honestly," he said, "they're probably going to want to study us." The emergency medical team arrived, within minutes of the alarms shutting off, but by then Jinho was already sitting up and insisting he was fine. The medics, a mix of humans and the first Vitherian medical personnel to work alongside Earth doctors, ran every scan they could think of while Nara sat in the corner, looking more worried by the minute. "Physically, you're remarkably well," Dr. Haywan, the lead human medic, announced after reviewing the results. "Some bruising around your ribs and chest, but nothing serious. However, we're detecting some unusual neural activity that we'd like to monitor." Before Jinho could ask what that meant, the room's communication system crackled to life. Two faces appeared on the main screen, one human, one Vitherian. Neither looked happy. "Dr. Park," said Director Minsu from Earth's Xenological Research Division. His usually calm demeanor was completely gone. "We need a full report immediately. What exactly happened in that room?" The Vitherian face on screen belonged to someone Jinho had never seen before, but from Nara's sharp intake of breath, he could tell this was someone important. The alien official had darker scales than Nara, with silver markings around his eyes that suggested great age. "Diplomat Nara," the Vitherian official said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. "You will explain yourself now." Nara stood slowly, her whole body tense. "High Counselor Thane, I can explain—" "Explain?" Thane's voice rose to a dangerous hiss. "You have committed the greatest violation. You have touched a foreign serpent and created an unnatural bond between species. Do you understand what you have done?" Director Minsu leaned forward on his screen. "What bond? Dr. Park, are you injured in some way we haven't detected?" Jinho looked at Nara, who was now visibly shaking. Through their new connection, he could feel her terror, not of punishment but of being separated from him forever. "Sir," Jinho said carefully, "something unexpected did happen. When Nara saved my life, she had to touch my pet snake to communicate with their guardian. It seems to have created some kind of link between us." "Link?" Director Minsu's eyes lit up with scientific interest. "What kind of link? Can you demonstrate it?" "Absolutely not," High Counselor Thane snapped. "Diplomat Nara, you will return to Vither Prime immediately for judgment. The contamination must be contained before it spreads." "Contamination?" Jinho stood up, ignoring the pain in his ribs. "She saved my life. If she hadn't acted, your guardian would have killed me." "Better that than this abomination," Thane replied. Coldly, "Our laws exist for good reason. The mixing of species consciousness leads only to chaos and destruction." Director Minsu was frantically taking notes. "Dr. Park, we need to run comprehensive tests. If you've developed some form of telepathic connection with an alien species, this could revolutionize everything we know about interspecies communication." I'm not a test subject," Nara said quietly, but her voice carried clearly through the room. "You are a criminal," Thane responded. "You have violated the most sacred laws of our people. When you return, you will face exile to the outer rings, where you can do no more damage." Jinho felt something snap inside him. Through their bond, he could feel Nara's despair, her certainty that she would never see her home again, never see her family. She had thrown away everything she cared about to save a stranger from another world. "No," he said firmly, "she's not going anywhere." Both officials stared at him in surprise. "Dr. Park," Director Minsu said carefully, "you don't have the authority to—" "She risked everything to save my life," Jinho interrupted. "While your people," he looked directly at High Counselor Thane, "built a killing machine that nearly murdered an innocent researcher during a peaceful first contact. If anyone should be facing judgment, it's whoever programmed that thing to attack without bothering to check if there was actually a threat." Thane's scales darkened with anger. "You dare lecture us on—" "I dare," Jinho said, moving to stand beside Nara, Because unlike your ancient laws, she saw a person in danger and chose to help. That's not contamination. That's courage. 3 days after the incident, Jin-ho was officially cleared for duty, but ordered to remain on the station for observation. Nara had been confined to diplomatic quarters, while both governments argued about what to do with them. The bond between them had only grown stronger, making it impossible for either to ignore what was happening. Jin-ho sat in his small quarters, absently stroking Bomi's scales while staring out at the stars. The little python had been unusually active lately, often lifting her head to look at him with what seemed like deeper understanding than any snake should possess. A soft knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," he called, already knowing who it would be. The bond let him sense Nara's presence before she even arrived. She entered quietly, her golden eyes darting around to make sure they were alone. "The guards think I'm in my room sleeping," she said with a slight smile. "But I had to see you. Something is happening to me, and I think you feel it too." Jin-ho nodded. Over the past few days, he'd been experiencing strange moments where thoughts that weren't his own would flash through his mind. Images of Vither Prime, memories of Nara's childhood, even knowledge about Vitherian science that he'd never studied. "It's getting stronger," he said, making room for her to sit beside him on the small couch. "This morning I woke up knowing how to count in your language even though you never taught me." Nara sat down, careful to maintain some distance between them. "And I've been dreaming about Earth, about places I've never seen. Your memories of walking in something called rain." Bomi lifted her head and looked at both of them, then began to move in a way that was becoming familiar. The same purposeful patterns she'd used to communicate with the Guardian. But this time, instead of seeming random, Jin-ho understood what she was doing. "She's trying to tell us something," he said, watching the python's movements intently. "Not trying," Nara corrected softly. "She is telling us something. Watch." Nara reached out slowly and let Bomi coil around her wrist. The moment the snake touched her scales, both Jin-ho and Nara gasped. The bond between them exploded into crystal clarity, like someone had just turned on a light in a dark room. Suddenly, Jin-ho wasn't just hearing Nara's voice, he was experiencing her thoughts directly, not in words but in pure meaning that his brain somehow translated instantly. "Can you understand this?" Nara's mental voice was clearer than if she had spoken aloud. "Perfectly." Jin-ho responded, not with words, but with the thought itself. "It's like Bomi is acting as a translator between our minds." More than a translator, Nara's excitement flooded through the connection. "She's amplifying what was already there. The bond we created when I touched her, she's making it stronger, clearer." To test this theory, Nara focused on a complex scientific concept from her world, the mathematical principles behind their faster-than-light travel. Jin-ho felt the knowledge flow into his mind, not as confusing alien equations, but as perfectly understandable concepts that his brain processed as easily as if he'd studied them for years. In return, Jin-ho shared his understanding of human genetics, the research that had brought him to this mission in the first place. Through the connection, Nara not only understood the science but felt his passion for discovery, his excitement at unlocking the mysteries of life itself. "This is incredible," Nara thought. "We're not just sharing information. We're sharing understanding, emotion, context, everything." They spent the next hour testing the limits of their connection, sharing memories, concepts, even sensory experiences. Jin-ho showed Nara what chocolate tasted like, while she let him experience the feeling of swimming in the crystal-clear lakes of her homeworld. But the most amazing discovery came when they realized they could communicate complex ideas that had no equivalent in either of their languages. Concepts that required paragraphs to explain verbally could be shared instantly and perfectly through their bond. "Do you realize what this means?" Jin-ho's excitement pulsed through the connection. "This isn't just telepathy. It's perfect communication between species. No misunderstandings, no translation errors, no cultural barriers. My people's worst fear," Nara responded, but her mental voice carried wonder rather than worry. "And perhaps humanity's greatest opportunity." Bomi tightened gently around Nara's, wrist, and both of them felt a wave of contentment from the little snake. She seemed pleased with what she had helped them discover. "What do we do now?" Nara asked. Jinho looked out at the stars again, but now they seemed less distant, less cold. "We show them that some rules are meant to be broken." The crisis began. On day 7 of their confinement, Jinho was in the station's observation deck, watching Earth rise over the horizon when alarms started blaring throughout the facility. Not the gentle chimes of routine alerts, but the harsh, urgent wails that meant serious trouble. Station Commander Park Yong-Soo's voice crackled over the intercom, tense and strained. "All personnel to emergency stations. We have multiple Vytherian warships approaching our position. This is not a drill." Jinho's blood ran cold. Through his bond with Nara, he felt her panic spike from 3 decks away. She was sensing the same thing he was. This was about to become much more than a diplomatic incident. He ran through the corridors, ignoring the startled looks from crew members who were supposed to keep him under observation. When he reached Nara's quarters, he found her pressed against the small window, staring out at space with terror in her golden eyes. "They're not here to negotiate," she said without turning around. "Those are enforcement fleet vessels. They've come to take me, home by force if necessary." Jinho joined her at the window and saw them, 5 sleek ships that looked like giant serpents made of metal, their hulls gleaming with the same silver patterns as the Bio Guardian. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Minutes, maybe less." Nara finally turned to face him. "Jinho, your people won't back down from this. They can't afford to look weak during first contact. And my people, they've already decided that stopping the contamination is worth risking war." Through their bond, Jinho felt the weight of her despair. Both of their species were about to destroy any chance of peaceful relations because of ancient fears and stubborn pride. "There has to be another way," he said, taking her hand. The moment their skin touched, their connection flared to life, amplified by Bomi, who was coiled around his other wrist. "There is," Nara said suddenly, her eyes widening. "But it's dangerous. If we fail, we could make everything worse." "What are you thinking?" Instead of answering with words, she shared her idea through their bond. Jinho saw her plan in perfect detail, a live demonstration of their connection to both governments simultaneously, showing them exactly what they had discovered and what it could mean for both species. "That's insane," Jinho said. "You want to open our minds to complete strangers? What if they try to control us or hurt us, or what if they understand?" Nara interrupted. "What if, just this once, fear doesn't win?" The station shuddered. As the Vytherian ships moved closer, their weapon systems powering up. In the distance, Jinho could see human defense platforms turning to face the alien vessels, their own weapons beginning to glow with deadly energy. "We have to try," he said finally, "but we'll need Bomi to amplify the signal. Can she handle connecting to that many minds at once?" They both looked down at the little python, who lifted her head as if she understood the question. For a moment, Bomi's dark eyes seemed to hold an intelligence far beyond what any earth snake should possess. "Only one way to find out," Nara said. They made their way to the communications center where they found chaos. Director Min-Soo was screaming orders at technicians while Commander Park tried to coordinate with Earth's defense fleet. High Counselor, Thane's face filled multiple screens, his silver-marked features twisted with cold determination. "Director," Jinho called out over the noise, "we need to address both governments, right now." "This is not the time, Dr. Park," Min-Soo snapped. "We're about to have the first interstellar war in human history." "That's exactly why this is the time," Nara said, moving to stand beside Jinho. "Please, give us 5 minutes to show you what we've discovered. If it doesn't work, you can go back to preparing for war." Something in her voice made everyone in the room pause. Even Thane stopped his angry demands for Nara's immediate surrender. 5 minutes, Min-Soo said finally. "But if this goes wrong, it won't," Jinho said, though he wasn't entirely sure he believed it. He looked at Nara, who nodded and placed her hand over his, where Bomi was coiled. "Open a channel to all ships," Nara said. "Human and Vytherian. It's time to show them what understanding really looks like." 6 months later, Jinho stood in the observation lounge of Research Station Unity, watching construction robots put the finishing touches on the facility's newest wing. The station was a marvel of combined human and Vitherian engineering. Sleek Earth technology blended seamlessly with the organic curves and bio-integrated systems that the Vitherians favored. "The serpent gardens are almost ready," Nara said, joining him at the massive viewport. She carried a small terrarium containing 3 baby pythons, earth snakes that had been specially selected for the bridge program. "Dr. Su-Jin thinks we can start the first training sessions next week." Jin-Ho smiled, reaching over to gently stroke one of the tiny snakes through the terrarium's air holes. "Hard to believe these little ones are going to change everything." The key. Demonstration 6 months ago had been even more successful than they dared hope. When Jin-Ho and Nara had opened their minds to both governments through their bond with Bomi, the results had been transformative. High Counselor Thane had experienced human curiosity and wonder directly, feeling Jin-Ho's genuine excitement about learning from other species. Director Min-Su had felt Nara's deep respect for life and her people's commitment to peaceful coexistence. More importantly, both leaders had experienced the perfect communication that was possible through the serpent-mediated connection. No misunderstandings, no cultural barriers, no room for the fear and suspicion that had nearly led to war. "The latest report from Earth came in this morning," Jin-Ho said, pulling up a holographic display. 17 more volunteers have been approved for bond training, and 3 of them are bringing their own snakes. Nara laughed, a sound that still sent warmth through their connection even after all these months. "My people's reaction has been even more surprising. Young Vitherians are lining up to volunteer for what their grandparents call the greatest heresy ever conceived." Through the viewport, they could see one of the most remarkable sights in known space: human and Vitherian children playing together in the station's recreational areas, some of them already showing the early signs of developing bonds with their serpent partners. The kids had adapted to interspecies communication with the remarkable flexibility that only the young possessed. "Dr. Park, Dr. Nara," a voice called from behind them. They turned to see Commander Jae-hyun, the station's human administrator, approaching with a data pad and a big grin. "The test results from the Mars colony are in. The bridge serpents there successfully facilitated communication between the human settlers and the Centaurian trade delegation." "That's the 5th successful first contact this month," Nara said, her golden eyes bright with excitement. "The program is working beyond our wildest expectations." Jin-Ho felt a familiar weight on his shoulder as Bomi, now considerably larger than she'd been 6 months ago, coiled around his neck in her favorite resting position. Through their bond, he could sense her contentment, not just her own, but echoes of the satisfaction felt by dozens of other bridge serpents throughout human and Vitherian space. "The Andromedans want to send a delegation next month," Commander Jae-hyun continued. "They've heard about our communication breakthrough and want to see if it can work with their species too." "We'll need to be careful," Nara cautioned. "Every species is different. What works for humans and Vitherians might not work for others, but—" "It's worth trying," Jin-Ho said. Through his bond with Nara, he shared his vision of a future where dozens of species could communicate perfectly, where misunderstandings and conflicts born of inability to truly connect became things of the past. The intercom chimed softly. "Dr. Park and Dr. Nara to Laboratory 7, please. The new batch of bridge candidates has arrived." As they walked through the corridors of Station Unity, passing research labs where human and Vitherian scientists worked side by side, Jin-Ho reflected on how much had changed. What had started as a desperate attempt to save his life had become something neither species could have imagined. "Do you ever regret it?" he asked Nara as they entered the laboratory, where 20 young volunteers from both species waited nervously. With their serpent partners, Nara looked at him with surprise. "Regret breaking the most sacred law of my people? Regret risking exile and disgrace?" She paused dramatically, then smiled. "Only that it took us so long to do it." Jin-Ho grinned back at her. "Ready to change the universe again?" "Always," she replied. And together they walked into the laboratory to begin training the next generation of bridge builders.